Hey guys, I got asked the question to talk a little bit about what it was like to create my first book, What the Walrus Knows, which is no longer in print, and I can explain a little bit more why that's the case. Just because they were kind of curious about that process, and that was on Sunday, so I thought I would just share a little bit about this. So this book is, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, there are about 3 chapters at the beginning that explains sort of briefly how to work with spirit animals. And so it's called An Eccentric's Field, What the Walrus Knows, An Eccentric's Field Guide to Working with the Beastie Energies. Working with Beastie Energies. Talk about a weird title. I mean, when you pick a title, if you want to prioritize it at Amazon so people are, you might want to use words in your title, for example, that people are searching for if it's a nonfiction book. I picked this title simply because it delighted me, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if you want to, let's say you're writing a book that includes something about yoga, you might want to at least include the word yoga in your subtitle, for example, just so when people are looking for books on yoga, they might find yours. Anyway, I had this dream of writing a book, had no idea how to do it. I got together with Grace Karina, who is an editor, who you can check out her website, Grace Karina, KERINA.com. And we had a conversation on the phone, and I really liked her. I had met her through another connection, and she had helped a business partner and I come up with a personal statement, and I really liked working with her, and I was really happy with the result of our personal statement, so I kind of had this built-in trust with her. And when we started talking about it, I said, I want to create this book that makes it more approachable for people to understand these ideas of spirit animals. And I'd explained that I had been given some talks on that for a place called Good Vibe University. I had been teaching a little bit online, even though I wasn't an expert. I was learning myself, but I was just learning these things and sharing what was helping me and trying to help other people with it. And she said, well, why don't you take those lectures and have them typed up, have them, transcribed. And I was like, that's a great idea. And so what we did, that's essentially what the first 3 chapters or so are just those lectures transcribed. And of course I added to them and refined them and so forth. Let's see, I think we had 5 chapters at the beginning. So there's sort of an introduction, and then there's these chapters explaining guest beasties, core beasties, and some tools and exercises. And then the rest of the book is, you can see there for each animal there are 10 lines that are sort of rather poetic lines that are kind of almost like aligning affirmations. So if you saw a cardinal, you could try to connect with the energy of cardinal by looking at these things. So for caribou, for example, it's like relish routine, in repetition find efficiency, enhanced awareness and ease. If you'd seen caterpillar, one of the lines was remain concealed, blend in, hide from view. So it's almost like permission to retreat a little bit from the world. So how we came up with this format is like, I just explained to her that I wanted people to be able to step into the energy of these animals, and it was like, that's what I wanted them to be able to almost like shape shift into, like to match the frequency of an animal. And we talked about it back and forth, and she's like, well, what if you wrote some lines to invite them to do that? And so that's what I did. And eventually we came up with 10, these 10, I guess they're 12 lines, but 10 lines. And the first line is usually very like a commanding, like keep pace, like a very simple phrase. And then the second part was explaining what that meant. And we decided 10 lines. I don't know why. We could have done 8. And by the time I was 3/4 through the book, I sure wish we had said 8, because, it was hard to come up with 10 unique, very interesting lines. And then how I worked with Grace was I would send her like 12 manifestos. She would read them and ask refining questions. Like, And this was pretty straightforward because they were, you know, pretty poetic, and, you know, my job was just to make sure they were fascinating, interesting to read. They were not cliche, obviously, which is something you want to avoid, but something really fresh that really made sense to me. And I was looking at animal mythology. I have some funky Victorian children's books that have lots of stuff on animals that have really funny phrases in them. So I was kind of getting high on my own supply. And also, I basically, you know, was the creative director for the design of the book as well. And so, for example, all of these images were collected by me through public domain resources. And also there was another company called Dover, which I collected a lot of images from and paid for their use. These days, there's so much good stuff out there. But then I hired a designer her name is Dre. And I basically said, listen, I want it to feel really kind of old-fashioned, handmade. She came up with all these cool things where it looks like there's like a taped message on the side. I gave her like all these things that I liked, like this flying squirrel. And then obviously the hundreds and hundreds of beastie images. And then she created a page design, and let me just show you, like, you know, she created this incredible index design. I gave her the font. This was the font that I wanted to use. So I was really involved in the design of the book. And I wanted to show you one of the cool pages. Oh, she did such an amazing job. Let's see if I can. I also gave her some beautiful quotes. So when she had some space, she would take my Roald Dahl quote and then add a beastie to it. I remember when I got this design back, like here's one of the chapters, and you can see she took one of the beasties and kind of made it lighter, and then she added, you know, a stronger one there. I remember screaming and running around the house. I was so excited because I thought it was so beautiful and unique what she did, like where she's got the soft heron and then she's got this kind of juxtaposed with the rhino. She did an amazing job. Once it was all done, I self-published it. We had to have it. Once it was all corrected, you have to have it copy edited, which means you pay somebody to go through the whole thing to make sure there's not one sentence out of line, there's not one spelling error, there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It's perfect. Of course, it's never perfect. There's usually some mistake in there. And then I self-published it. And that process that's been a while, but the company that I used was Ingram, which is now called Ingram Lightning Source. And I think Ingram Spark is what they're known now as. So if you self-publish, that's the company I went through. And the other company that I use now for self-publishing is also KDP, which is the company Amazon. So it'll go into Kindle, etc. And they have a very easy process for uploading books. But that's essentially the story. And I want to say too that it was difficult. Like, this book looks so easy, but it looks easy and simple the way it was put together and everything. But I personally was tortured in moments, you know, just wondering, can I even get this done? It was so overwhelming. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, just know that's part of the process, especially the first time you write a book. It's just kind of like, can I really do this? Can I put it all together? It can feel so stressful. And I was also going through a lot of turmoil in my personal life, so that may have had a lot to do with it. But the neat thing about this book is that because the quality was so good, I did not sell a million copies of it, obviously, but years later when I was getting another book deal when I finally went and made a book proposal to get a traditional book deal for my memoir, Swimming with Elephants, my agent got asked by one of the people she was pitching, hey, it looks like she's got a spirit animal book. Can you tell us about that? And she did, and shared the manuscript with them of this book, and they ended up paying me and giving me a book contract to write a whole new book. And the requirement was that I took this out of production. So that's why this one's out of print. And that's when I wrote, it's called The Book of Beasties. And it's a much bigger book. It's probably twice the size of this, much more illustrated, but much the same design. I mean, almost not identical, but very similar. So that was a neat thing. So sometimes self-publishing leads to traditional publishing. And in this case, I wasn't interested in traditional publishing. I just wanted to make a book. I was like, I don't care. I just want to create this. I didn't have any notion of like worrying too much about it. I just wanted to get it out there and I didn't want to wait. So that was why I self-published. So anyway, I hope that gives you some more information. So it was challenging. I had a lot of help with Grace, who I paid. So not only were my blood, sweat, and tears went into this, but I also paid for editorial help, for design help. And so yeah, being creative and like being an artist is not free, right? It costs money and investing our time and energy. And maybe you know a friend, or you could barter time for editing or something like that. There's many ways to, and I've had family and friends read my books to help me edit them and things like that over the years, which is so much fun and wonderful if you have friends and family who are willing, and also the kind of people that you want to work with on hearing their opinion. That's important. So hope this helped. Sending you all lots of love, and I can't wait to see your books get out there. And yeah, mwah.